Hello, everyone. Welcome. Uh, we're going to get started here. Want to chat about investment banker engagement letters and deals. So let me just get this. Let me get my screen shared here. Sorry about this. Let's see. Slideshow. Play from the start. There we go. Okay. Oh, I got to get you shared though. Share. All right. So again, hey everybody, thanks for coming today. Allow me to briefly introduce myself. My name is Stan Doida, founder of Doida Crow Legal. We help entrepreneurs grow, finance, and buy and sell businesses. Today we're talking about engagement letters with investment bankers and just kind of some of the ins and outs and what to be looking for when you're hiring somebody, and kind of the key important terms to be looking at. I always describe to folks, kind of jokingly, but I think it's a good analogy. Um, I describe investment bankers, brokers as hunters and lawyers as butchers. I need somebody to bring me a dead animal to carve up for me to be able to be useful. I don't know how to hunt. So investment bankers definitely play a critical role in selling your company. And you could certainly do your hunting yourself, but I don't know that you're going to truly understand what the market is. An investment banking process might solicit hundreds of potential buyers, whittle it down to a handful or so, and then try to bring all those offers together at the same time, which just gives you a significant amount of um, insight as to what the market will pay for your company and some negotiating leverage as you've got multiple offers to kind of go off of. So I don't want to undermine the importance of an investment banker. I think they serve a tremendously valuable role. If you get the right one who finds the right buyer, I mean, I think they're worth their weight in gold there. So again, talking about the engagement letter, why this matters. This is the contract between you and the investment banker that says what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, what they're going to get paid, and some of the terms that surround that. Occasionally, we see clients hiring lawyers at the same time as investment bankers, and they'll have the lawyer look at the investment banking engagement letter. Always a good idea, but oftentimes we're hired the law firm is hired after the fact, and the engagement letter is already in place, so it is what it is at that point. So these terms, once they're signed, they govern what the relationship is going to be. And you can, I think you can negotiate some of this stuff. Some of these terms we're going to talk about may be less flexible for some investment banking firms than others, but nonetheless, I think you can always see that this is some of this stuff you can change and you can ask for differences. Okay, so moving on, how do investment bankers get paid? There's a couple of the main one is the success fee. It is some percentage based on purchase price at closing. And I think depending, I've got some studies on this that kind of show where the percentages go. And let me back up real quickly. I think an investment banker and a broker are kind of different. They hunt in different hunting grounds, and they're selling different types of companies, but or rather different size of companies. I'm talking about investment bankers here, and investment banking I think really starts kind of on the low end of maybe $5 million in enterprise value, and it goes up to billions of dollars. But where I'm talking about today is really in that kind of 5 to 100 plus $1 million enterprise value. Success fees, I think depending on where they are, you might see something between 2 and 8%. And I've dumbed that down to a single percentage, but oftentimes an investment banker will use something called like a reverse Lehman scale, where it might say, it's 6% for the first 3 million bucks, and then seven, and then 5% for the next 10 million, but it sort of scales down as the um, uh, enterprise value gets bigger and bigger. So success fee is the big one. A lot of investment banks are also going to charge a monthly engagement or retainer fee. I put down here $5,000 to $15,000. I'm sure you could see some on the outside of that range, but that's where I have seen them mostly, in that $5,000 to $15,000 a month. Usually, that monthly engagement is credited towards the success fees. I think that would be an important point to make sure that you're clarifying that, that monthly amount that you're paying is going to be credited towards the success fee ultimately. And then, some firms, depending on the size of the deal, they may have a minimum. They may have a minimum success fee regardless of what the sale price is. So I've seen these go anywhere from, 500,000 to, million plus, that regardless of what the size of your company is, that's going to be the minimum that they're going to take as a success fee. So look for that. That is that is something to always be mindful of there. Um, Obviously the success fees aren't gonna come to fruition if the bankers don't get a deal closed. But that monthly engagement letter, or that monthly engagement fee, will obviously be out the door and sort of non-refundable. I've had situations too where a buyer, or excuse me, a seller may have a couple of companies already kind of on the line there, and they may try to negotiate a different fee if that particular buyer ends up closing. And I've seen bankers react differently to that. Some have said, "All right, we'll do a reduced fee for that, but we're still going to be trying to get a broad audience to come to the table with offers there." And then others have said, "Well, no, we're still going to run the same process we run, and if that just happens to be the best buyer, then we extracted max value out of them." So. Um, the other key, I mean, one of the other keys to investment banking engagement letters is, defining how the success fee is going to be calculated. Because you hear purchase price, right? You hear purchase price, but purchase price, when you get down to it, is made up of a whole lot of different things. It might be cash at closing, it might be earnouts, it might be promissory notes, it might be rollover equity. There may be some component of employment compensation in there. But you want to look at how the purchase price is determined and when things are payable. For example, it's not uncommon to see, for example, an engagement letter say that the max earnout is going to be included as part of the purchase price and payable at closing. So the earnout is obviously contingent consideration that may never happen. And it's not uncommon to see that go to get included in the purchase price, and therefore the investment banker's fee at closing, regardless of whether it actually ever comes to fruition or not. And then others you might see, hey, earnouts, something like that will be paid to the investment banker if and when it's paid to the sellers. So those are, some tricks and traps to be mindful of. Rollover equity, I would usually see as something that would be included, even though there is some contingent nature to being paid value on your rollover equity. I would normally see that be included in the purchase price. So again, all something you should be looking at and thinking about when you're hiring an investment banker. Um, let's see. Yeah, I'm gonna move to the next one. Oh, yeah, again, it just, it's important to clarify, especially if it's important to you, that something like maybe an earnout is paid if and when paid rather than assumed to have been paid at closing. We talked a little bit about this, but earnouts and rollovers are the most misunderstood. We've seen agreements that have, again, like I said, limit the payment of earnout to if and when it's actually paid, and others that just calculate it as fully maximized at closing and included in the investment banking fee. So take a look. If I were looking at a engagement fee, or engagement letter, I might try to you know defer the payment of any earnout consideration to if and when paid, and to the extent it's paid. This one I think is a big one. It's tail periods. And oops. The tail period is basically if this comes in if you've run a process with an investment banker and you haven't found a buyer, and you say, hey, you know what, we're gonna terminate the engagement right now. We're gonna take the business off the market, or at least with you, and consider our alternative options, which may be a different sale, a different broker or investment banker, etc. We've also had people who have been dissatisfied with their investment bankers and have wanted to terminate the engagement. So that happens. The big issue that comes into play there is, what's the tail period and what's it say about who's covered? I would generally say investment banks are trying to push a tail period between 12 and 24 months. And what a tail period means is, if you close a transaction, within, say, 12 months after you terminate this engagement, we still get our fee. Um, again, I think 24 months is probably too long. That's 2 full years down the road there. And I think, that's a lot of time to be still on the hook for somebody for a potential transaction. I think so again, I would try to get this down to 12 months. 12 months is where I would, generally try to push folks to say, hey, this is where our tail period is. I think the other sort of trick or trap in some of these engagement letters is, who is this covering? Um, I think it makes a lot of sense for, from the investment banker's perspective, that it covers anybody that they introduced you to, or that they, reached out to and solicited on your behalf. I don't think it makes sense to cover anybody under the sun, particularly those with whom they had no contact. But some of these engagement letters will try to capture any transaction that happens within that period of time. So again, you want to make sure that you're narrowing it to, yeah, who did you reach out to, and who have you actually had some meaningful dialogue. We have kind of a note here about broad definitions for introduction. At the end of the day, one of the things I usually ask for at when I'm negotiating a termination, or I mean, an engagement letter, is, at termination, we want the investment banking firm to send us a list of everybody that they have contacted, so that we have some data point of, as of the date of termination, these are the people we contacted. And again, you got to tie that to, this is who is going to be covered under this tail, so that we know if we go to one of these people during this tail period, we're going to owe that firm a fee. So again, watch out. We've certainly found people who have been dissatisfied with their investment banking firm, who terminate, and then they kind of have this long, broad tail that really limits what they can do in the 12 to 24 months after terminating, without potentially owing somebody who they were dissatisfied with their services, a significant fee. I would say most engagement letters are gonna have some exclusivity saying, "Hey, we're the only people out here looking for you." Um, Even if you bring your, like we talked about earlier, even if you bring your own buyer, that's something you should bring up and discuss. But I don't know that it's going to you're going to sort of absolve yourself of paying a fee if that buyer transacts. Again, from the investment banker's perspective, I think that if they bring a whole group of people to the table to negotiate and bid against one another, and your identified buyer is one of them, you know, bringing all those other people to the table brings value and probably ups your price. So, I think it's justifiable for them to charge for that. So, but it's something you got to talk about and just talk about it, up front and see what middle ground you can find there. Um, I think there are situations where there are co-representations or multiple people looking acting as a investment banker for a firm. I can't say I see those often or really at all. Normally, it's exclusive in that one investment banking firm during the term is going to be the only people out there looking. Um, Again, most engagement letters are going to say, hey, you could terminate this at any time. You just got to provide some notice. Maybe it's 30 days, and you're probably also paying that monthly retainer fee during that period of time as well. But yeah, so you got to just make sure you're checking that out. Um, Make sure that you are aware of how to get in and out of the agreement. Talk to your investment banking folks about that, and make sure you're comfortable with what's going to happen. But again, that tail is going to start to apply once we get there. Um, got some market data here. We're nearly at the end. This is a small topic here, but we're nearly at the end here. But I got some market data here from one of these deal study surveys, just to give you a sense of where the market is. The lower the deal, the higher percentage. And again, it's usually that kind of reverse Lehman scale where it sort of creeps down at the margins of the next millions or 5 million or $10 million. It sort of starts to scale down. But if you're selling your company at that five to $10 million, I might, this data point says that the median is 6.3. I might see something as high as 8 for that size of a transaction. And again, this is netted through all the Lehman, reduction. So this is like the overall average percentage. When you get to a deal that's at, call it 20 million, you're seeing something close to, something around 4% of the total. But again, I think, results are going to vary significantly from firm to firm. At 100 million, you might see this thing come down to 2% on the total amount. Minimum fees, we talked a little bit about that, saying, hey, the least we're going to do this transaction for if we close is X dollars. It's used by about 72% of firms that were in this study. Um, I found this number surprising because my empirical evidence is directly counter to this, but 46% of the respondents of that survey said they do not credit their monthly retainer fees towards the success fees. But in my experience, it's almost all of them have been crediting their retainer to the success fee. So again, all the more reason to kind of be paying attention to what the terms say and then asking for things like this. I mean, something like this, if it takes you 12 months to find a buyer, at a $10,000 a month, I mean, just changing that credit thing is 120,000 bucks in your pocket there. So it's meaningful money, and it's a meaningful term. And then, yeah, contingent compensation, 67% of all the engagement letters required full success fee at closing, even if some of it was consideration is deferred or contingent. So again, 2 out of 3 investment banking firms are going to say, well, we're going to count the entire earnout at closing. So you want to be in that 1/3 data point where you kind of get a little bit of a break saying, hey, if I get paid this, I will pay you. But it looks like the odds are against you on that, just from empirical data here. Kind of running to the end here, but what can you negotiate? Fees, the percentage, the monthly retainer, whether it's credited. These are all things that you can negotiate. Whether contingent consideration is paid at closing or not. These are all things that you can negotiate. And you may not win on every point that I've discussed here today, but you could certainly probably make some ground, and the fee is obviously going to be dollars in your pocket. Second biggest one, I think, is tail period. Again, I think 6 months is probably overly aggressive. I would say 12 months is a reasonable time period for a tail period to exist. And then again, require at the end of the engagement that the tail period is only linked to a finite list of people that they provide to you so that you know who you're going to owe money on. Um, I think the lower important terms are the exclusivity. If there's a strategic buyer, I think again, start if there's a known buyer, um, when you start the process, I think you have that discussion early. Um, and then, again, on termination, there's some ideas to maybe cap a fee that on a transaction that's covered by a tail period. And then, just make sure that you understand the termination process and the termination, um, the rights you have and the obligations you have post termination. Again, I don't want to I don't want to downplay the importance investment bankers bring. Again, just going back, they're the hunters. They're the ones who actually find something that can bring you value. And I think there's a lot of value in having a good investment banker. Um, but make sure you understand the agreement with them. Second, as we talked about, don't be afraid to ask for some of these changes. I think there is some malleability with every firm that I've dealt with on some of these issues, at least. And you don't have to think about this as adversarial. I think again, most investment banking firms are going to be somewhat amenable to some of these terms. They're just putting their best interest out in the first draft of the engagement letter. But I think it's totally fine to ask for things, ask for clarification. If things aren't clear, you gotta get some clarity on it and ask for changes or deviations from that and see what they're willing to do. But at the end of the day, you got to find the right investment banking firm that is going to help you get to closing because that's what matters here. And then, again, bottom line is if it's not clear, if the fee, how it's calculated isn't clear, or maybe you don't understand it, then the bottom line is you're just going to end up paying more than maybe you would have had you had some of these discussions at the outset. That is really all I've got to say about investment banking engagement letters. If there are any questions, I would love to entertain them. Otherwise, I will give you your day back and we can um, give you this 5 minutes back and you can go about your day there. So I'll give everybody just a minute if they want to interject a question. Otherwise, I appreciate all of you taking some time out of your lunch hour here to learn a little bit more. And if we can ever be a help with this, any M&A project or any other corporate project, we'd be happy to help and see how we can help you guys. All right, I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm gonna bid you all adieu and thank you again for coming. Have a good day. Bye bye.